Hey class, welcome to week number 4 of Social Work 540, Social and Economic Justice 1. This week you have a paper due. This is your first assignment of this class, Social Welfare Problem History paper. It will be due on Sunday of this week. So this video is going to go over a few things about this paper, the expectations, formatting, guidelines, anything you need to know to understand what is expected of you for this paper. So in week number 3 in your discussion forum post, you identified the social welfare problem that you'd like to look at more closely for this assignment. This paper will be a 4 to 5 page paper where you're going to explore and analyze the problem in more depth. You're going to look at the roots, history, scope, and impact of the problem, who it affects, how it has come about, and what's been done about it. I know that it's sometimes challenging to figure out how to fit a lot of information into 4 to 5 pages, but this will be a good opportunity to start working on crafting concise writing that is able to present an issue in as few words as possible, but in as thorough a way as possible to be able to really convey your point and your thoughts in the most effective way possible. You're going to use at least 6 sources, and I would really encourage you to practice finding reputable sources for this paper. Those would include peer-reviewed journals, so that's things like sociology articles, social work journal articles, some may find some psychology articles, those kinds of peer-reviewed journals. You may find information from national advocacy organizations that it really investigate social policy issues and write reports, publish reports on those things. You may find government reports that have been issued on different social problems. Some news articles are appropriate if you need to help contextualize the problem or demonstrate the scope or demonstrate impact. But try not to use all news articles. We do also want you to look at whether these problems have been studied and documented in other ways in some of the other journal articles. I would also encourage you to please review any websites that you are getting news articles from, or you're getting kind of non-published information that's available on the internet. Just make sure that they're coming from websites that are reputable, that are attached to an organization or that are attached to a reputable news source before citing them. Wikipedia is never a reputable website to use in academic work. It may contain a lot of information and facts and other sources, but for academic purposes, Wikipedia is not acceptable. So in this paper, you will need to touch on these 6 points. So first, you're going to look at what point or period in time your issue was identified and defined as a social problem. The thing that you're looking at may have existed for a long time, and it may have been problematic for people for a long time. But at what point did society start saying this is a social problem that we have to address? There are many, many turning points for what we've come to understand as social problems. For example, when looking at gun violence in public places and particularly in schools, we often say Columbine was a turning point or a deciding moment in that social issue when we started looking at it. So many social issues, if not all social issues, often have a kind of a point in time in history when we started looking at this differently and identifying it as more of a problem. In the second point, who identified it as the problem? Were they institutions that identified this as a social problem? Was it a person, a few people, a group? You're going to look at who identified this problem, because when we start to look at who is talking about something as a social problem, we can start again to look at the values that they're bringing to the table and the perspective and ideology with which they are approaching the social problem, which then in turn determines how the problem is dealt with. So it's important to determine who is talking about it, who is identifying this as a social problem. The third point, What societal values and beliefs have affected the way the U.S. has responded to the problem at various points in history? So this is really important, as I was alluding to in the second point. Again, we come back to the question of values, our beliefs that we're bringing to the table that affect the way we view everything. So it's important to try to identify the values with which the people or institutions or groups or the society is viewing this social problem. So try to think not just with your own values in this question, but what values were at play in the way that this problem had been identified and responded to. And you're going to look at that. If the problem has existed for a long time, can you look and see that there's an evolution of values and different approaches that have been taken with this problem throughout history? Then you're going to look at the scope of the problem. How big is this problem? Are we talking about, back in the days of prohibition of alcohol? Are we talking about when the problem had been identified as a national problem that we needed to look at prohibiting alcohol all over the place? Or are we talking about something that affects certain populations? So you're going to identify the scope, and you're going to identify what population or populations are actually affected by the problem. In number 5, you're going to start to look a little bit more analytically at this problem. You're going to look and see what ways the problem has been impacted by culture, socioeconomics, so financial questions, market questions, societal values, race, ethnicity, sex, gender, whether there's a power struggle going on around this particular problem. You're going to look at all of these social factors and determine how the problem or the evolution of the problem and its responses have been impacted by all of these things. And then finally, leading up to that, you're going to look at and see what the response to the problem has been throughout history. Is this something new where we're just now looking at a response? Or is it something that's been around for a long time and many different approaches have been tried with this problem, and different responses have come up, and different policies have been created or different programs have been created to address this problem, and we've seen kind of how those each have played out over time. So discuss at least 2 policies that have been designed to remedy this social problem. You can talk about more, but do talk about at least 2 social policies that have been designed to remedy the social problem. So again, you're going to look at how the problem was identified, when it was identified, by whom, who it affects, how big it is, what impacts it, what are all of the dynamics at play in understanding this social problem, and then how the problem has been addressed throughout history, what policies have been created to address this. We can see kind of how that goes from the identification of the problem to the response and all of the different factors that go into analyzing it. So as always, you're going to be using APA format for this paper. It should be typed, double-spaced, 12-point times New Roman font with 1-inch margins. Your title page and reference page is not included in your 4 to 5 page count. I cannot underscore any more how important it is to proofread your papers. I suggest reading your paper out loud before submitting it to make sure the writing makes sense. Oftentimes with proofreading issues, we're not necessarily just talking about spelling issues that might come up in your Microsoft Word editor. We want to look for issues that are what I call spugly, what is called spugly. So this is issues with spelling, punctuation, usage, and grammar. So sometimes, we write pretty passively, or sometimes we write a little bit carelessly, and so, sentences could run on, or punctuation is missed. So you want to look for those kinds of writing issues that make your writing less clear. So in a 4 to 5 page paper where there's a lot to cover, a lot of history to go over, you want to have the most clear writing possible. And so I would encourage you to proofread, read it out loud, take the extra time that it requires to make sure that you're turning in behind. Please make sure that you are citing your work. Err on the side of citing too much rather than too little. If you think that, gosh, I'm citing so many things, I'm using so many resources, it's going to look like I'm not thinking for myself. I would encourage you to think for yourself, but also if you are using work from someone else that you're citing in a journal article or a published report, that you cite it. A lot of times when looking at social problems, we may be discussing things that seem to be common knowledge. If something is truly common knowledge, like the sky is blue, that may not need to be cited. But if we're talking about something that could have been studied or has likely been studied as an issue, like the sky is blue but turning gray due to overpopulation and contamination by traffic. It may be common knowledge, but it's something that people have started studying further. So you would want to cite that as work that someone else has already done. Please make sure that you are providing both in-text citations and you are using a reference page listing all of your citations in APA format. Paraphrases generally do not sound exactly like the original quote. So if you are trying to paraphrase something and you find yourself just basically repeating the same quote with the same words, quote it with quotation marks and cite it appropriately. Direct quotes must have quotation marks and a proper citation. I gave an example of what that looks like. So in a direct quote, periods go on the outside of the parenthesis. You'll see how that looks in text. And then a paraphrase below that of Klein 2018 discussed the placement of periods in in-text citations, indicating that they should cap the end of the sentence. That is also a suggestion, but also just an offering of the difference between direct quotes and paraphrases. If anyone has questions about that, please do let me know. I'm happy to point you in the direction of resources that you can use to help you properly cite things. You can also always contact the Writing Center. Purdue Online Writing Lab has some wonderful resources for how to cite certain types of material that you're welcome to reference in writing your papers. If anyone has any questions going forward with this paper, please contact me early in the week so we can make sure to have enough time if we need to discuss anything or go over anything. But otherwise, enjoy this process. I think that the topics that you're looking at are very relevant to what we're doing today in society and how we're addressing issues. So enjoy them, have fun kind of flexing your policy analysis muscles. Have a great week.